Okay, we are ready to go this morning, so I hope you got a handout on the way in. Let's open with the word of prayer. Gracious Father, once again, we just marvel at your extreme goodness to us on a daily basis. We thank you for especially the loveliness of the weather this time of year. We thank you for the way you take care of your garden with snow, with rain, with sun, with the change of the seasons. We thank you that all of this is theological as we realize you said this is the way it would be. Thank you for, of course, Jesus and all he's done for us, and that's what makes it possible for us to even be here as the KBC family of God. We ask for help in everything we do every day, that we would be good representatives for you and that we would shine our light in this area, even though sometimes it might only seem to have candle power. We would realize that you work exceedingly abundantly above whatever we could imagine. And we see you do so many wonderful things that have your signature on it, that you have put your stamp, you've signed off on it. Only you could do it, and we thank you for it. So help us to be faithful. Thank you for this day set apart from others. Thank you for your word that we can study. And just pray you'll take us to some new levels maybe of learning today that will encourage us in our Bible reading. We ask for Jesus' sake. Amen. Okay, in the KBC Adult Sunday School class, we're have a fall series here entitled Bible Basics, Surveying the Foundation. And basically all these classes are simply meant to strengthen our understanding of the foundation. The foundation, of course, being the Word of God. So that's why Pastor Phil spent multiple weeks just talking about what seemed to be maybe some of the picky things, but they're very, very important. So we know that we can trust the Bible. The Bible comes from God. God has preserved it, etc. And of course, hopefully all this study will make us better Bible readers as well as better Bible users, that is, applying it to our own lives. Again, remember, what an incredible, one-of-a-kind gift God has given to us in His Word. He's not going to give us, or He's not going to make any revisions in it, so that's why we just study what we have instead of saying, I'll wait till the Revised Version comes out in 2037. He's not going to give us a contemporary 21st century American edition just for us because American Christians are so special. He's not going to give us a volume 2 because when he looks back over his notes he realizes he forgot to put a few things in there that he intended, and so this would be a good time to update and give us a volume 2. This book has been settled in heaven, as the psalmist says. And that's why it makes it so important for us to just diligently, daily be in it, pleading to God for help, to understand it better, and then to make the application. So I hope you are indeed reading the Bible at least once a year, and so I hope you're almost finished for 2024. So last 2 weeks, we looked at archaeology as a tool to help us better understand the Word of God. And as we said, archaeology is a modern science. It is a man-made science, but there are a lot of benefits to it. And ultimately, I like the expression, it enlightens the cultural world. It enlightens the part of the world where the Israelites actually where God's story in the Bible was being played out. It just shines the light on it, and it helps us to see things in perspective, with customs, with confirmation, with illustrations, with explanations. So as we read it, we can see why the Bible characters at times did things that they did that seem so weird to us. And yet we understand they were just being a good contemporary Christian, if you will, a contemporary Israelite. They had just kissed up to the culture. And of course, God recorded it, not because it was okay to do it. He did it to be lessons for us. Now, today, Lord willing, we want to look at another tool to put in our toolbox, and this is the tool of geography. Okay, now that might seem strange that it is such a beneficial tool, especially if you remember that 8th grade class or that freshman class in college that you had to take in geography to fulfill a requirement, and you were bored, out of your mind. Maybe you even ended up flunking it, having to retake it or something. And so you say, how in the world can geography ever be a blessing? Well, hopefully in the next 55 minutes I can sell you on it. And if I can't, see me afterward. I'll refund your entrance fee in totality. Now, perhaps as we think of the drama of the Bible as the storyline is played out, we might kind of think of geography as just being another stage prop, if you will, to help us. In other words, as we know, we have the Bible. Even if you have very little understanding of geography, you can still understand the Bible. You can still be blessed by the Bible. You can still be saved. You can still grow in your walk with God. But just like on a stage, the more stage props there are, the more things come to light, the more it can help you, shall we say, enlighten you with some of the things that are being played out on the stage. And so it is with geography as well. So on your sheet at the very top, I gave a definition, a very technical definition to start. Geography is a science that deals with the earth and its life, especially the description of land, sea, air, and the distribution of plant and animal life, including man and his industries. Maybe you say, well, what doesn't it include then? Okay, that sounds pretty big. Well, yes, this is a big subject. But just to show you how significant the geography of the Bible is, I put another quote here. Of all the writings held sacred by the world's religions, and you can think of their books that they say are their scripture, of all the writings held sacred by the world's religions, only the Bible presents a message linked to geography. And this is, again, just a wonderful reminder to us of when God wrote the Bible, He didn't write it, at 40,000 feet, things that are happening up there, and said, just trust me that this is really what the atmosphere... No, He wrote a book that everything we see and experience is right down here, and shall we say, we can plug it in because it was real people, real time, real history, real places. These aren't fabricated places that when we say Jesus went to Bugu Hugu, we look on a map and we say we have no idea where that was. It doesn't even sound like it was on the planet. No, it's all rooted in geography. The Bible is replete with geographical information, not as a guidebook for travelers or a textbook on geography, but often almost incidental to the message. In other words, God didn't give us a book with geography because He says, I know you want to make the ultimate trip to the Holy Land someday, and I want to make it easy for you to see if your tour guide, ticks off all the boxes. No. It's almost like geography is just thrown in here and there, and like I say, as you read it, you can understand the Bible basically without it, because it's just kind of there as another stage prop. But boy, when you start thinking about it, do those stage props bring the storyline alive? Now, as we consider the different things, I'm going to encourage you to think of them in light of like the United States or even, the entire world, but just how we use these very things we're talking about. So it's not just like, Bible geography is like this, and this is how we'll illustrate it in a moment. But think of it like geography, and how do we use geography all the time, and we don't even realize phrases that are used, things that we say, etc., etc. So as we hurry over the first part, I'm going to just use some illustrations from the United States so that you understand what I mean by this very thing. Okay, so 5 very important areas for biblical study are, number 1, topography. That's going to be the one we're going to go into a little bit more detail in just a moment. But by topography, we were referring to like regions of a country, the physical features of a country like rivers, mountains, desert, etc. So think of how often we talk about maybe southeastern United States. And as soon as you do, you think of crazy people who put up with humidity, right? You think of, weather patterns that are only in the southeast. Or maybe we talk about the southwest United States. And immediately you say, why would you want to live a place where it's 120 in the shade for half the year and no rain, etc.? Okay? Secondly, spatial. Distance, location, battlegrounds, key cities. And of course, it's very important, sometimes in the spatial geography, to know the actual location of a site. If somebody would say, well, This covers all the way from Logan to St. George. You say, so? Well, what is important to know when you use that expression? The entire state, in effect. Logan represents the northern border, St. George the southern border. Just like we're going to see in the Bible when they talk about from Dan to Beersheba. It's not just mentioning two towns. There's significance in that. All the way from the north, all the way to the south. Or sometimes it's the importance of knowing what a place stands for because of a famous past event. So for example, 3 Mile Island. And you say, oh yeah, that's where my family would always vacation. It was an island. It was 3 miles long. No, you don't get it. 3 Mile Island stands for something else. Or of course, Gettysburg or the Mountain Meadows Massacre. I mean, all of those places, even if you don't know where they are, that you couldn't put your finger on them on a map, they're significant geographically because of events that happened there. Or the importance of knowing a place where there's a certain characteristic associated with it, or something is associated with it. So you think of Las Vegas, and immediately your mind just starts blowing the fuses. Or you think of New Orleans, or you hear Martha's Vineyard. You say, oh yeah, that was really neat as a kid. We always went there and we got our grapes. No, you don't get it. You don't know what Martha's Vineyard is. Or Ellis Island, or Greenwich Village. I mean, on and on. We have all these things we use, and it's just understood in the United States. You know what's behind it. You know what it's representing. And then we have flora, which is agriculture. It is plant life and trees. And of course, there's so many ways we use that, but even think of how athletic teams will use this. Anybody here a Big Ten fan, especially with a team from the Midwest and West? The Cornhuskers, Nebraska Cornhuskers. Okay? Ohio State Buckeye. Well, I didn't want to show my colors here, Bob, but you did. Okay. Yeah, okay. Or fauna, animal life. Wow, when you think of professional sports teams or when you think of college teams, they've really played in this. University of Florida, Gators. University of Colorado, Buffaloes. University of Texas, Longhorns. Yeah, and you can go on and on, okay? So in other words, we're very familiar with this kind of stuff, and we just don't even think about it. And then the last one we'll look at here would be then weather. And in the United States, just think of hurricanes. And basically, they only hit a certain part of the country. And if somebody in North Dakota would say, man, that was a bummer of a hurricane we had last week, we might say, is it too cold up there? Something's frozen, your mind isn't functioning. That's generally not where hurricanes are. But we do have a place in America we call Tornado Alley. And when you talk about that, somebody doesn't say, yeah, I know, I worry about that too, living around Portland. No, that's generally not the case. Or we talk about humidity and the difference in humidity, etc. So this kind of stuff is all geography. And of course, as we study the Bible and see how the Bible uses it, it can open up things for us. Now, first two really big picture terms before we really narrow in on, shall we say, the Holy Land. First of all is the Fertile Crescent. This was a term actually coined by an Egyptologist back in the mid-1800s, a guy named J.H. Breasted, and it refers to the crescent-shaped fertile area that runs from the Persian Gulf in the east to the Nile Delta in the west. And so the Persian Gulf, Persian Gulf is here, so the Fertile Crescent is this area, and by the way, this is the Tigris River, and this will be the Euphrates River, we'll get to in just a second. But the Fertile Crescent is this big crescent that just comes up like this, down like this through Palestine, and down to the Nile Delta. And of course, biblical history was played out in that because the children of Israel were taken captive over into Babylon. Some of them were taken over here partially to Assyria, etc. But generally, that's not where when we think of the Bible, that's not where it plays out. But it is important to know that. Secondly, Mesopotamia. If you knew Greek, you would know immediately what it means. Mesos is middle, Potamos is river, middle of the rivers. So Mesopotamia is the land between the rivers. So that's referring to this area in here between the Euphrates River and the Tigris River. And of course, in more recent years, more recent decades, I guess, people have noted that quite often, or a lot more, because of Iran, Iraq, American soldiers over there, various things like that. And of course, Abraham was originally from Ur of the Chaldees. Ur is just a little bit up and to the west of the Persian Gulf, right down in here. So Abraham was born and bred there, and then when God called him, that's when he went on up here, and then eventually he came down to the land God promised him. Okay? Now, that's the real big picture, basically, of what we'd call the biblical world. And of course, you know, the Greek Empire comes into play then with intertestamental Judaism, etc. But basically, the Bible is played out here. Now, what about the size of Palestine? Because that's what we're going to be focused on right here. Okay? This is the Sea of Galilee. That's the Dead Sea, if you didn't recognize them. By the way, the map is drawn to a scale. 1 inch equals whatever you want it to be, okay? So just tried to get a little bit of perspective here. So what about the size of Palestine? Well, from Dan is located up here north of the Sea of Galilee. Beersheba is located down here, and so basically that's the north and south border. So multiple times as you read the Bible, and it talks about all the way, everybody gathered together from Dan to Beersheba. In other words, they gathered together from Logan to St. George, the whole schmo, the whole country. Okay? Now, that distance makes up about 10,000 square miles. At its widest point, Palestine is basically 75 miles. The length is about 150 miles from north to south. And of course, when you think of the incredible topography, the diversity of flora, fauna, weather patterns, etc. I mean, this is really, really incredible that this little small part of God's whole created earth would play such a key role and have so much importance for eternity, if you will, right there. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at. So number one, let's start with five major headings here, or five major places concerning topography, the land itself. And I'm going to try and be really quick here because there's so much material. So you can spend hours just reading books, literally, that deal with the topography. But first of all, there are four really neat divisions that are natural divisions of this land, the land for the children of Israel. The first is called the maritime or coastal plain. Okay, as you see, the entire western border of Israel is the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, so this maritime plain goes all the way along here, and you can look at maps where you see some places it's pretty thin, only a couple of miles, other places it might go out to 10 miles or so. But the maritime plain up in the north is the plain of Akko. What famous people lived up here? Phoenicians. Then we get to the plain of Sharon in the middle, which is a more agricultural area, beautiful for flowers, agriculture. And then when you get down here is the plain of Philistia. Now really think, don't inadvisedly say it. Who lived there? The Philistines, okay. And that's where, of course, we had the famous Philistine Pentapolis. Penta, 5, Polis cities. And as you read the Bible over and over, it will refer to those 5 cities: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gaza, Gath, and Ekron. Okay? And of course, that area has been in the news a lot more lately as well. Okay? So that's what we're talking about there. Now, from Mount Carmel, the jut in the sea, from Mount Carmel down to Egypt, there is really no good harbor. And that's why you don't read that the Israelites were ever attacked by a sea people coming from that direction. That's why you don't read about Israel having a maritime industry, because this seacoast is just not good for for having ships come. So they didn't need to worry about dock worker strikes, okay? There were no docks. Now, when you get up here, of course, farther north with Tyre and Sidon, they were more famous for that because the coast was much more beneficial for that. Now, there are two very interesting things, though, concerning Solomon and the fact of this coast. Number one is, Solomon did have an incredible maritime industry. So does that go opposite what I just said? No. His maritime industry was down here at Ezion Geber or Elath on the Gulf of Aqaba. And so that's why when you read, he would send ships out. From all indications, they would actually be gone for more than a year. And they would come back with peacocks and monkeys and all kinds of wealth, etc. But they weren't coming over here and docking somewhere here. They would be coming up here in the Persian Gulf, and then they would in the Gulf of Aqaba, and then they would come up. And number two, second interesting thing with the Mediterranean Sea and Solomon, when he was going to build the temple in Jerusalem, remember what he did? Because the cedars of Lebanon and trees from there were so famous and could be so helpful, he hired people up here in Lebanon. They came to the Mediterranean Sea, they floated them down the Mediterranean Sea, and then at Joppa, they got out there and they quickly pulled the logs into land, and then they brought them overland from Joppa into Jerusalem. So that's pretty fascinating how he used the Mediterranean Sea, if you will, to get things to Jerusalem. Okay, then we move to the Central Range. That was the maritime or coastal plain. Now, second is the Central Range, and this is a range of mountains that actually begins much farther north than even Palestine. So you might kind of think for us like the Rocky Mountains, and just think of how many spurs there are, how many extensions there are, etc. So this was running in the midst of the land, basically. So you had your maritime plain there, and then here, going down, you had this whole series, basically, of mountains. Okay? A couple of quick things to note there. One of them is in the midst of the plain, one of the plains, there was the plain of Megiddo or Esdraelon. Okay? Now, this was very significant because it gave, it's right up in here area, and that gave, that enabled you, if you're down in Egypt, to come up along here, but you need to get through the mountain pass some way fairly easily. You could pass through here, then you could keep going, and then the Fertile Crescent. So in other words, if you will, if we would say this is, if we would say that Palestine was the bridge in the Fertile Crescent to do travel, to do trading here, coming all the way here, Megiddo was like the key passage point you need to make. I think it was an Egyptian king, maybe Thutmose V, who said, I'm drawing a blank. What did he say? Yeah, it was something like, whoever controls Megiddo controls 1,000 towns. In other words, because if you're in control of this place right here, wow, if you can get through here, then you've got control of everything. It's better than just trying to get all these other little towns out here. That's not going to help you. Okay? And of course, Megiddo, as you know, played a key role in 2 Kings 23:29. What famous Israelite king was killed there? Again, I'd like to talk to him someday in heaven and say, where was your head? What were you thinking? You were trying to bring about reforms, and then you did this dumb thing. Who was the king? Josiah, King Josiah. Okay, remember, this is when there was a lot of jockeying politically in the ancient Near East, and the Egyptians were coming up here. They were trying to go to Carchemish, and so what did he do? He tried to stop the Egyptians, and that's when the Egyptian king said, or the Egyptian military commander, whether he really was saying it honestly or not, he said, God told me to tell you to go home. This has nothing to do with you. Just let me get through here. And Josiah, of course, didn't, and Josiah was killed, and that's then when the southern kingdom, really, the bottom dropped out, because that was 609 BC. And then, of course, Revelation 16:16 says the great future battle is going to be centered here. And of course, if you're in the southern range, or the southern part of this mountainous range, who did a lot of running around there exploring caves, crevices, all that stuff? David, yeah, not purposefully, but just to save his life. And so when you read the Psalms and he talks about, this little niche in the rock and this high point and this cave and all that stuff, well, you're getting a real treat on understanding, should we say, more of the topography of that central range where he was running for his life. Then we come to the Jordan Valley, the Jordan Rift, and this, of course, is very simple. It simply means it starts up here, and it's just this strip of land coming down here where the Jordan River is. As I put on your sheet there, I believe it starts out about 1,200 feet above sea level if you're in the north. By the time you get to the Dead Sea, right on the surface, you've dropped another 1,292 feet. And then if you'd go to the bottom of the Dead Sea, you've dropped another 1,300 feet. So you can see how drastic this drop is right there. And then the fourth area is the Transjordan or Eastern Range. Transjordan simply means across the Jordan from the perspective of somebody who's living here. So this is the Eastern Range over here. And likewise in the Eastern Range, three key areas, if you will. You have Bashan way up in the north. Why is Bashan famous? Cattle, the bulls of Bashan. So if you tell somebody, I want you to come over tomorrow night for I'm going to do something on the grill. Well, what are you going to serve me? Roadkill? No, bulls of Bashan. Don't turn down the invitation, okay? You're getting some really good meat. In the middle was Gilead, and then in the south, farther south, the mountains of Moab, okay? And of course, this was the area where there were, several things I put on your sheet here, I guess. First of all, the King's Highway went from Damascus in the north all the way to the Gulf of Aqaba. So you had a good passage up here with Syria and Damascus, the capital, right down here to the Gulf of Aqaba. This also was some pretty rich land. So remember when Israel came around to go in and take the land that God promised them, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh said, hey, we've got a lot of cattle, we're good at it. Could we inherit over here? And God said, yeah, that would be okay. So they inherited over there. Also, this is the area that was home to three nations that, of course, constantly interacted with the children of Israel. And who are those? If you go east of the Jordan River here, what people group was living right here? Ammonite. You didn't say that very authoritatively, Bob.
Well, I was 99% sure.
Okay. So that's your 99% voice when you, okay. And then you drop a little farther east of the Dead Sea. What people's group? Moabites. And then you drop down here south of the Dead Sea. What people group? Edomites. Okay, so those three, as you're reading the Bible, those three nations will come into play quite often. Now, two other quickly minor topographical features. The Shephelah or Shephelah, which in our King James Version, I don't think you'll ever see it translated like that. It usually says like valley or vale. Actually, the Hebrew word means low area, lowlands. So that's pretty much the lowlands that are separating the maritime plain and the mountainous region here. It's this area right in here, okay? And that's pretty much where the life of Samson played out. It was really on a fairly small geographical area. And then the Negev, N-E-G-E-V, or sometimes it's Negeb, N-E-G-E-B. That is simply farther south. So the Negev is the southland that takes you all the way down to the Gulf of Aqaba. So, as you are reading, I would simply encourage you to watch for these geographical things and see what took place along there. And if it talks about lovely flowers growing in this area, or, it was just basically barren. And so it wasn't too useful for daily habitation. Okay, let's move on to the spatial. Spatial, several things, as we said. It's important to know the actual location at times. And so, for example, think of the 6 cities of refuge. These were cities that God had set apart so that a person would have refuge. If you accidentally killed someone, you would be able to quickly flee to one of those to have your case heard, etc. It wouldn't be a matter of, whoa, I need to just barricade myself at home and get ready for this shootout. I failed to put it on your sheet, but maybe you want to write down the 2 key chapters, the 2 key places where you find the city of refuge. Numbers 35, so that was even before Israel got into the promised land. God said, I'm setting these cities apart for this theological reason. And then when they did get into the land in Joshua chapter 20, the whole chapter is devoted to actually setting these cities apart. And God in His goodness, if you will, gave them 3 cities on the west side of the Jordan where they lived, as well as in the Transjordan. And so it didn't matter where you lived. You had, shall we say, pretty easy access to get to a city of refuge. So if you accidentally killed somebody and you were living down here, you didn't say, man, that's a long way to go way up here to a city of refuge. I mean, there's no hope. This is kind of a joke. No. And so on your sheet, I did list for you these cities. West of the Jordan was Kadesh, way up in the north. And then in the middle of the land, Shechem. And then in the south, Hebron, south of Jerusalem. And then east of the Jordan, you had Golan, way up east of the Sea of Galilee. You had Ramoth in the center part. And then you had Bezer down by the northern tip of the Dead Sea. Okay? Another good reason to know geography is just the outline, if you will, of the first half of the book of Joshua. When Joshua and the people were coming and they were going to enter the land, again, God had a fantastic battle plan that He gave to Joshua so that they would be able to more easily take the land. I mean, let's face it, they weren't going to have time, if you will, to simply come up here and take one city. No. So God, in His sovereign oversight of it all, brought them into the middle of the land, and they entered here. And so as you start the book of Joshua, in chapters 6 to 9, you have what we call the central campaign, where they were taking these central cities, and you can see what a good battle plan that was, because they were cutting off northern Canaanites from southern Canaanites. Then, after they had pretty much gotten the central part of the land, Joshua 10, they went to the south, the southern campaign, to try and consolidate it. And by that time, if you will, the rest of it was kind of a piece of cake when you've got God on your side. So they went to the north. Chapter 11 is the northern campaign. And that was all under God's direction as He worked using miracles, all kinds of things that if you were a Canaanite general, you had to be super frustrated, like, what in the world can we do? If we do this, we're a piece of cake. If we do that, we're a piece of cake. If we stay here, we're a piece of cake. I mean, we're losers no matter what. And that's what God had said even before Israel got to the promised land. I will put the fear of you into the hearts of the people so that their knees will be knocking. They will indeed be ripe for the picking if you obey me. And then a third one, and this is a real interesting one, 1 Kings 15, 16 to 22. Let me just quickly relate the story for the sake of time, okay? This is approximately, as it would appear, 35 years after the division of the kingdom. So remember, after Solomon died, the kingdom was divided because of the, as we would say, humanly speaking, stupidity of his son Rehoboam. And so you have the northern kingdom up here, and you have the southern kingdom down here. The southern kingdom is the one that had the line of David. The northern kingdom ended up with no good kings. Every king of the north, about 5 or so ruling families, every single one of them was bad news. Okay? Well, there was this one king named Baasha, and so he said, you know what? Because remember, there were fluid, if you will, lines where the difference between the north and the south was. It wasn't like you simply were driving your chariot and all of a sudden along the side of the road is a sign, you are now entering the southern kingdom. No. Okay? So as various kings came to power, they would naturally try and impede the other kingdom. They would try and force themselves down a little bit, claim more territory. So Baasha has said, okay, I am going to try and really fortify, my border right here. And this was at Ramah, which was only about 4 miles north of Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem is the capital of the southern kingdom. And again, when you think of it, just think of how close 4 miles is to Kaysville Bible Church when you're thinking of proportion. And here you have this northern kingdom, really the border sort of that close to it, and this enemy king is coming to try and build it up. Okay? Asa, who was the southern king, he did some things that were godly, but other things he struggled with, like so many of them did. But he said, what can I do to stop this? He said, aha, I'm a good politician, I'm really smart. So, up here, of course, you have Syria. He says, you know what, I'm in good terms with the Syrian government. So he sent them a really nice gift. And he said, you know what I want you to do, pal? I want you to come over here and I want you to attack the northern part of the northern kingdom. Just wreak havoc. Do whatever you can to make this guy pull his soldiers and all of his workers up here to defend the north so he doesn't lose his country. And as soon as these people left and went north, guess what Asa of the southern kingdom did? He said, hey, thanks for all the free building material. I don't need to go to Home Depot or Lowe's or anywhere like that. So he went up here and he took all that building material and he had his men fortify a city about 3 miles north of Jerusalem and another one about 8 miles north of Jerusalem. Fantastic politicians' deals, okay? He knew who to stroke up here to get him to do something to the northern kingdom so they would have to move, and he could do it. Well, by knowing that little bit of geography, you begin to realize, whoa, geography is important here. This isn't just, oh, this guy was building condos in a city and then couldn't get the financing, so he left. No. This was all about politicking. This was all about trusting God. This was all about very important things. Secondly, a second subpoint here is, under the spatial, it's important to know what a place stands for because of a famous past event. And so, of course, one of the most famous in the Old Testament is Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, that story occurs in Genesis 19, 1-16. And, of course, it is known for the very evil character of the people, as well as God's judgment on those wicked cities. And I've given to you there the references, how many times as you keep reading the Bible, it is understood that you know what Sodom and Gomorrah is all about, because it's not going to go into an explanation. So, for example, in Deuteronomy chapter 29 and verse 23, this was even before Israel entered the land, God says, He's talking about the importance of faithfulness. And the whole land thereof is brimstone and salt and burning, that it is not sown, etc. It will be like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in His anger. So He's simply taking it for granted that they knew what had happened there. Or I like it when you get over to, say, Isaiah 1. Isaiah chapter 1, remember Isaiah is speaking to people who would claim to be God's people. He says in 1:9, except the Lord of hosts had left us a small remnant, we should have been as Sodom and we should have been like Gomorrah. Talking about His grace, He says, God's going to bring judgment, but God is so gracious that He's not going to just totally wipe you out like Sodom and Gomorrah. And people didn't say, Sodom and Gomorrah, what are you talking about? Was that a train wreck somewhere, or what happened? No, they knew it was total devastation. The next verse, hear the word of the Lord. Now he really gets picky here. Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear unto the law of our God, you people of Gomorrah. Were Sodom and Gomorrah rebuilt and Isaiah is there ministering to the leaders in Sodom and Gomorrah? No. He's talking to the leaders in Jerusalem, and he says, you people who claim this rich heritage and think you're God's favored people, he says, you're just like rulers in Sodom. You're just like rulers in Gomorrah. And they didn't say, oh, thank you, Isaiah, for the compliment. We appreciate it. We'll put that on our resume. No. They knew it was bad news to be called somebody, to be like somebody who was in charge in Sodom and Gomorrah at one time. Okay? And you can read the rest of the references. Another thing, it's important to know a place because of a certain characteristic about it. So, for example, when Jeroboam established his own religion, you can go back to 1 Kings 12 and read about it. When you had the split in the kingdom here, okay, we have the split in the kingdom, and Jeroboam was the king in the north, and when he took over and established his own religion in 1 Kings 12, it was basically, shall we say, he was trying to make it parallel to what was happening in the south, so he would tell the people, you don't need to go south to worship in Jerusalem. We've got all the goods here in the north. And it says that he built two famous cult centers. One was in Dan and one was in Bethel. Basically, where would you put those on the map? North and south. Dan was up here. Bethel was basically right here. So in other words, that basically becomes the geographical boundary marker for the northern kingdom, Dan to Bethel. Okay? Now Bethel, B-E-T-H, is the Hebrew word for house, and El is the basically generic word for God. Okay? So when the prophets, especially Amos, but specifically Hosea, because Hosea was ministering a couple hundred years after, 150 years or so after the split, he told the people, he said, why don't you go to Beth Aven and sin? And you're saying, Beth Aven, my maps are crazy. They need to be updated. Where in the world is Beth Aven? Well, actually, he's playing on this name, house, and the Hebrew word that comes into English as Aven is a Old Testament word for sin, one of the vocabulary words for sin that means wickedness or evil. And so Hosea, if you will, with tongue in cheek says, hey, why don't you go to the house of sin and sin? Almost like today if somebody would say, we're going on family vacation. You'd say, where are you going? We're going to Sin City. You probably wouldn't say, oh, you're going to Ogden. Or you're going to, wherever. No. Or somebody would say, maybe, yeah, for vacation, we're going to the Big Easy to really ease out. And you probably wouldn't say, the Big Easy. Let me see if I can find that on a map here. You'd say, no, I know where you're going and what you probably plan to do. And that's what Hosea is telling them. He's mocking this, but he's really hitting the nail on the head when he calls that place. He says it's not a house of God at all. It's a house of wickedness. It's a house of evil. So why in the world would you want to keep following the religion of Jeroboam? And then another example would be Hosea in chapter 9 and verse 9 and chapter 10 and verse 9. He refers simply to the days of Gibeah. And you say, oh, well, what in the world is Gibeah all about that he would even refer to that? Again, he took it for granted. They knew exactly what he meant, because if you go back to Judges chapter 19, you have one of those incredibly evil chapters in the Old Testament, where you have rape, you have murder, you have homosexuals, you have the husband then taking his dead wife and dismembering her and sending the 12 pieces, one to every tribe, to show the people and say, this is what our country has come to. Are you going to vote to have people who like this kind of stuff? And that was Gibeah. And as Hosea uses the term, Hosea basically says, remember, he's writing hundreds of years after that event, but he knows they remember it. It's written in the national consciousness as being, shall we say, a really low moral point. And he says, in effect, from the days of Gibeah till today, you have not improved your moral stature before God. You're just like people in Gibeah. What? We're rapists? We're homos? We're you name it. So by knowing that geographical locale, I mean, whoa, Hosea did not spare any words. And then another example would be in Hosea. He talks about Admah and Zeboim. And you say, Admah and Zeboim. I don't seem to read that on every page of the Old Testament. You don't. It's very seldom mentioned, but Admah and Zeboim were also cities of the plain that were right there with Sodom and Gomorrah. And so he refers to that as also to refer to the judgment of God. So if a prophet said, if you don't repent, God's going to make you like Admah and Zeboim, is that a tourist trap? Is that a wonderful place where they have, hot spas? No, it's a place of judgment. It's a place where the wrath of God is poured out. And then, of course, as I put on your sheet, you could put the whole book of Song of Solomon here as a case study, okay? Because he gives at least 10 geographical locales where he simply is taken for granted you know something about that place, so that you know when he talks about it what the comparison is. And without going there and reading them, remember, this is a very interesting book where the man talking to the woman or the woman talking to the man, and he says, dear, your hair looks like a flock of sheep coming down from Bashan. Oh, a flock of sheep. So were they out this morning and there's a lot of dew, her hair is wet, and sheep, their hair is probably kind of matted. So is he complimenting her saying, dear, you look lovely this morning with your wet, matted hair? Well, what's the point of comparison he's making that she didn't kick him in the shins? Okay? Or when he says, your nose reminds me of the tower in whatever. Oh, really? Does it stick out that far? Is it made out of marble, or what's the deal? But they were compliments, okay? And so that's where, again, geography really comes into a play, because the next verse doesn't say, and by that I mean this is what, that tower in so-and-so was like. You have to ask yourself the question, what's the point of comparison? But again, somebody, an Old Testament person reading it later, they would have known. They would have known why that city was famous. Okay, then as we think of flora and fauna, I put a couple of quotes on your sheet just to remind us of the significance here. As Stott has said, many of us have a good doctrine of redemption. This is on page 2. But a poor doctrine of creation. We become so absorbed in God's works of grace that we tend to forget His works of nature. But the Bible does not forget them. It presents the living God as equally Creator and Savior. And then as another guy says it, the Bible translator, for the Bible translator, perhaps no aspect of his work is more complex, more confusing, and more time-consuming than the problems encountered in attempting to render satisfactorily the terms for different plants and animals of the Scriptures. So, when we think of flora, of course, Flora was the goddess of flowers in Roman mythology, but the point we're thinking about here is the plant life, especially the plant life characteristic of a region, period, or special environment. And of course, another quote just reminding us of why there would be so many flora explanations or why there's so much of this in the Bible. Farming plays a major role in the economic, social, and religious life of ancient Palestine. Most of the population of Palestine was engaged in some type of agricultural work, and those that were not so engaged were dependent upon the farming communities for their subsistence. So I suppose today we might say, if God would be writing the Bible, I'm guessing, I'm not putting words in his mouth, hopefully, but if God would be writing the Bible today, what would perhaps be the major type of illustrations he'd use, since we're not generally farming communities? Pardon? Phil? No idea, no clue. It's not a trick question. What dominates everything of our lives? Technology. Yeah, technology. And so if God would be writing today, again, I'm just assuming, thinking of the way it is. if he would be writing today, probably you would have a lot of technological stuff in it, because that's what people gravitate around. That's what their life is. And if they're not in the tech industry themselves, they're using a lot of it just to be able to live every day. So my whole point is, it's no wonder that we find so much of flora in the Word of God. Now, as I put on your sheet, types of flora mentioned: trees, shrubs, plants, flowers, or weeds, or crops. And the key thing here is really the crops, because there is what we might call the staple crops, 3 staple crops for these Jews. One of them has to do with like grains, so you have wheat and barley. Another one has to do with wine, and another has to do with oil. Not the petroleum industry, but olive oil, okay? And so basically that's what we might call their daily necessities. And so probably, as some writers tell us, like when you're reading the New Testament and you're reading the Lord's Prayer, what did Jesus say? Give us this day our daily bread. Surely he was thinking of desserts in there, okay? So there's probably 4 staples. No, he was thinking of, we need wheat. In other words, we need some kind of grain. We also need the wine, and we also need the olive oil. And those were the things that basically really kept the economy moving. And so on your sheet I put there are at least 17 references in the Old Testament to those 3 things, because that was their daily life. So when God would come along and he would say, if you obey me, I will give you these things, maybe you say, oh man, but I also wanted this other thing and this other thing and this other, some pomegranates and a couple of dates, whatever. He's saying, no, I'm not saying I won't give them to you. I'm telling you, I will guarantee you your daily bread. I will give you the staples of life. I will give you exactly what you need. And by the way, it's kind of interesting, but in the New Testament, there are no passages where those 3 key things occur. Although there is one place where, by implication, the third thing would have occurred. Think of the Last Supper. You have the bread, you have the wine, and because it was dark, as writers remind us, they would have had olive oil lamps so that there would have been. When you get to Revelation, in Revelation 6, verses 5 to 6, you do find these 3 things mentioned. But that's the only place in the entire New Testament they occur together in one verse. So, what are the major biblical uses of flora? A, just a statement of fact, such as Deuteronomy 8:8. You are going to a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, etc. But secondly, the most significant is for illustrative purposes, illustration. So you have figures of speech, symbolism, etc. And a second subcategory there would be learning a lesson. And it seems this is what the New Testament really plays upon, where you find Jesus using flora as a way of illustrating things, like when he says, think of the lilies. And how does he use that illustration in Matthew 6? Beautiful, but he takes care of them, and I will take care of you. Yeah. Or in chapter 7 of Matthew, he talks about fruits, the kind and quality of fruits. James, the half-brother of Jesus, when he wrote his book, he surely had a lot of notes from Jesus in front of him, because he also refers to a lot of this very thing. Okay? Also remember Israel's calendar, their agricultural year that they had, and their festivities, their holiday season basically revolved around the agricultural year, etc. And as I put here, the Gezer calendar, and you can look back on the notes from last week, the archaeological notes where I meant to get to that, because the Gezer calendar is a really neat archaeological find. It is just a small little calendar. Okay, now think carefully before you answer this. Where do you think it was found? Gezer, yes, the Gezer calendar. It's this little thing that's basically what we would say kind of like a miniature blackboard. It's a palimpsest, which means it can be a little difficult to read, because a palimpsest is where you had a manuscript, you wrote something, and then you tried to scratch it off and write something else, kind of like an old blackboard with chalk. and maybe it was so pitted when you used your eraser, you didn't get everything, and when you wrote something over it, it was a little smudgy to see because the first writing is showing through. So that's what the Geezer calendar is. But the thing that really is significant is, instead of teaching the child like a child today would learn 30 days, half September, April, June, and November, you learned that, right? Some of you are looking at me like, no, you didn't. And you graduated from high school without knowing that? Okay. But instead of teaching that, the Geezer calendar, and it might have been a child, scholars debate back and forth, it might have been a child using this board to practice, or it might have actually been a teacher writing on the board to instruct his students. And I gave you on your sheet, you can read it there, how it says. 2 months of ingathering, 2 months of sowing, 2 months of late sowing. And it walked through the Israelite calendar for a whole year, and that's how those children would learn, that's how they would learn the, shall we say, the agricultural cycle. That's how they would learn the year. Okay? And then quickly moving to fauna. The Bible seems to use fauna in 4 ways, as a statement of fact, of course, but that doesn't mean that there's no significance. And I put here, like, compare Job 1:3 with 42:12. Because in Job 1, he had a certain amount of wealth. God took all that wealth away, and in Job 42, God doubled it. And so it's not just a matter of, early on in the book when it says this is how many cows he had and how many sheep and how many camels, and you say, don't bore me with that, who cares? No, it's very significant, because after God takes it all away, he doubles it at the end. A second use is listing, where again, this can be important, where you have a listing of clean and unclean animals. In Psalm 104, the listing of things shows God's extreme care for creatures he's made. The third way is sacrificial context. You think of Leviticus 1-9 and how only certain animals could be used for sacrifice. So that's significant. And then a really big category is illustration, simile, metaphor, etc. Think of like, and I mean, we use this a lot. We say somebody runs like a deer, or they eat like a pig, etc. Well, I mean, you don't immediately conjure up in your mind that this person you're talking about is down on all fours and he's licking out of a trough. No, you know what that expression means. And so it is in the Bible. We have to ask ourselves, what's the point of comparison? And Daniel 7 is a really good one, because nations are referred to as animals. Now, earlier in the book, they were referred to as this bright and shiny statue, which is the way they looked at themselves. But when God saw these great world powers, it was like, you're just ferocious, rapacious animals. Or theriomorphism. What is theriomorphism? Pardon? Something morphs into something else? Yeah, you give animal characteristics to God. And that's really interesting when God himself is the one who does it. And I gave you a Hosea reference there. And then also just learning a lesson where God uses, shall we say, some of his lesser creatures to teach us important lessons. To me, one of the most fascinating ones is Jeremiah 2:23 and 24, where God uses the sex life of an animal to teach us about the doctrine of sin. Or in Jeremiah 8 and verse 7, he talks about their leaders were worse than birds, because God has built intuitive knowledge into birds and they know how to respond to certain things. But God's people don't even know. Jeremiah 13, he uses the leopard spots to talk about ingrained sin, etc. So all kinds of animals are used to teach important theological lessons. And especially then when you think of the end of Job, when God spoke to Job, think of how many animals he used to try and put Job in his place. And especially what's super fascinating is when he talks about Behemoth, we're not even sure what that is. And then when he talks about Leviathan, and God spends a whole chapter in his revelation on one animal, and we're not even sure what animal that is. I mean, that's pretty fascinating when you really stop and think of it. But again, God is trying to make his point to Job. Finally, in the last minute and 23 seconds, The fifth category is weather. And this is also very significant because remember, even in this little piece of real estate, the weather pattern was incredible. Whether you get, no pun intended, whether or not you get much rain or whether it's high enough, you get a good amount of dew, so you really don't need that much rain because the dew is heavy. I mean, it's quite a weather pattern that is here. And God had told them, you can look at the first reference, Deuteronomy 11. This is right before they entered the land. And He told them, if you will obey me, I will give you rain in its season, the former rains, which are the early rain, which came in October to November, the latter rains in March and April, just at the perfect time for your crops. I will give you grain and new wine, oil, etc. But He said, if you don't take heed, you won't get the rain and your crops will not produce. You can go to Deuteronomy 28, the covenant curses. In the covenant curses, in the covenant blessings, what was the fact that He would send rain and He would give them the right weather pattern. In the covenant curses, their agriculture would just be wiped out. Amos refers to a drought to be actually a picture of what's going on spiritually. And he says, outwardly, you people are complaining, saying, where's the rain? Why doesn't God give us rain? But Amos says, God sent a drought to try and turn you back to Him, because the drought externally is a sign or a picture of what's going on in your heart. You're dry as dust spiritually on the inside. And it says, water off a duck's back, the people never repented, even though Amos was preaching that. And then, of course, you get to Jesus, where he used these illustrations, some illustrations of the weather as well, to try and make a point. So what we're trying to say today is, again, geography is such an incredible, eye-opening thing that can just put so many more pieces of furniture on the stage, if you will, more stage props, so that we can better understand the Bible. And of course, it takes more than a lifetime to master this kind of stuff and to get a hold of it. But hopefully, every year as you read the Bible, maybe make notations in the margin of your Bible, geography, whatever. Or as I put there at the bottom of your sheet, it's interesting to just go through every book of the Bible and say, okay, what do I see in Genesis concerning geography? What do I see in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers? Then go to the New Testament as you're walking through Matthew, Mark, etc. And you'll be shocked at the way God uses geography. Okay, Lord bless you. Take a 30-minute break and come back.